14 years had passed since Cannae, a triumph that had cost Hannibal 1/7 of his army. He had marched, fought battles, besieged towns, but for the last 8 years he had not defeated a Roman army in the field. While Hannibal stagnated in Italy, Carthage was losing her empire as Rome conquered all her overseas territories. Then in 204 BC, 4 legions landed in Africa under one of the most brilliant generals in Roman history, Scipio Africanus. After besieging Utica, he defeated a Carthaginian relief army in a night raid, killing 40,000 men. A few months later, Scipio decisively defeated a combined Carthaginian, Spanish, and Numidian army at the Battle of the Great Plains. Carthage now made her supreme effort. Hannibal was recalled from Italy and given command over the defense of Carthage herself. Hannibal had 50,000 infantry, his Italian veterans, plus Gauls from northern Italy, and local Carthaginian levies. In addition, he had over 1,000 Carthaginian cavalry, 2,000 elite Numidian cavalry under the Numidian commander Tychaeus, and nearly 80 elephants. It was a formidable force. Scipio commanded veteran troops, many of them survivors of Cannae and other Roman defeats, keen to wipe out their shame. In the best conditions, only 2 things could frontally defeat this war machine: the Macedonian phalanx and elephants. Hannibal did not have a phalanx, but he did have elephants. More importantly, he knew the Roman fighting system like the back of his hand, and he knew how to beat it. Hannibal had nearly 80 elephants, but Scipio's infantry was deployed nearly a kilometre wide, so the elephants could not form a solid wall. They would have to be spaced apart, with 1 elephant every 10 yards. To prevent the elephants from being surrounded and hamstrung, Hannibal deployed his Gallic and Iberian mercenaries directly behind them. The Carthaginian levies were behind the Gauls, in the position of a support line. But the real coup de grace would be delivered by Hannibal's Italian veterans, 20,000 strong. These were deployed a full 200 yards back from the first 2 infantry lines. Why so far away? They looked like a support line, but a support line was always directly behind the line it supported. What did Hannibal plan to do with them? Livy supposed that the Italian veterans were untrustworthy.
Then, leaving a moderate interval, he drew up a reserve line of Italic soldiers, most of these Bruttians, more of whom had followed him under compulsion and of necessity than of their own consent as he retired from Italy. Removed to the last line and separated by an open space as well, the Italic troops, of whom it was uncertain whether they were allies or enemies.
Polybius, however, who personally knew the family of Scipio and was much nearer in time to Zama than Livy, has a different story.
Hannibal himself went along the lines of his Italian army, and urged them to remember the 17 years during which they had been brothers in arms, and the number of battles they had fought with the Romans, in which they had never been beaten or given the Romans even hope of victory.
In the battle, the Italian veterans proved their worth.
Being nearly equal in numbers, spirit, courage, and arms, the battle was for a long time undecided, the men in their obstinate valor falling dead without giving way a step.
So why did Hannibal deploy them so far back? To answer that question, we need to look at Cannae. Facing a Roman army nearly twice the size of his own, Hannibal deployed his Spanish and Gallic heavy foot in the center in 2 lines, one thin and one thick, and his Carthaginian veterans on the flanks, also in 2 lines. But both Livy and Polybius mention that they were further back than the Gauls and Spanish. Why was that? The course of the battle shows why. Hannibal began by advancing his front line to form a flattened wedge. Whilst the skirmisher screens of both sides engaged each other, Hannibal's Gallic and Spanish cavalry routed the Roman cavalry near the river and drove them back. Seeing this, the Roman heavy infantry advanced to engage the Carthaginian main line. These were initially stopped by the wedge, since Hannibal had concentrated his very best Spanish and Gallic troops there. But eventually the wedge broke and fell back to the second Gallic line. This line initially gave way, falling back to the Carthaginian veterans, and separating the legions from their cavalry support. At this point, the veterans wrapped around the flanks of the legions, obliging them to stop their advance and turn to face this new threat. Some Numidians detached themselves to shut off the rear of the legionaries, and a short while later the victorious Gallic and Spanish cavalry saw the Allied cavalry off the field and then sealed the fate of the legionaries, who were slaughtered, 50,000 of them. At Zama, then, it is clear that Hannibal planned something similar. He needed to separate the Roman infantry from their cavalry. To do that, he needed to hold up the Roman cavalry, and even defeat them, whilst his infantry fell back, drawing the legions after them. For this to work, his Italian veterans had to be well away from the fighting, able to wheel into column and march around the Roman flanks, whilst the Gauls and Carthaginian conscripts gradually fell back. You can't fall back and wheel into column at the same time. But the entire plan depended on Hannibal having a superiority or at least equality in cavalry, and here there was a problem. Massinissa, the king of Numidia, was a Roman ally, who with Roman help had defeated and captured his rival Syphax at the Numidian capital Cirta. Massinissa had 4,000 Numidian cavalry. Cirta was 250 kilometers from Zama, and Hannibal did not know if he had yet joined Scipio. He had to find out. From Adrumentum he advanced towards Scipio at Zama by forced marches to reach Scipio as quickly as possible. Polybius describes what happened next.
From that place he sent spies to ascertain the place, nature, and strength of the Roman general's encampment. These spies were caught and brought to Scipio, who, so far from inflicting upon them the usual punishment of spies, appointed a tribune to show them everything in the camp, thoroughly and without reserve. He gave them provisions and an escort, and dispatched them with injunctions to be careful to tell Hannibal everything they had seen.
We were taken round by Scipio himself.
Scipio?
We thought we were dead men. We thought they'd kill us, but
he, the general, he just showed us around the camp.
What did he show you?
everything.
This did not make sense. Why had Scipio let Hannibal's spies see his camp and then let them go? Hannibal needed to size Scipio up. He sent a messenger requesting a meeting between the two generals.
When the herald had delivered his message, Scipio at once expressed his consent, and said that he would himself send him a message when it suited him to meet, naming the time and place. The herald returned to Hannibal with this answer. Next day Massinissa arrived with 6,000 infantry and about 4,000 cavalry.
The meeting did not go well. Hannibal offered Scipio peace. Polybius describes their conversation.
The Romans should retain all the countries for which we have fought up until now. I mean Sicily, Sardinia, and Iberia. And the Carthaginians should engage never to go to war with Rome for these. And also that all the islands lying between Italy and Libya should belong to Rome. For I am convinced that such a treaty will be at once safest for the Carthaginians, and most glorious for you and the entire people of Rome.
Scipio demanded unconditional surrender.
You must submit yourselves and your country to us unconditionally, or conquer us in the field.
As far as Hannibal knew, Scipio was outnumbered in infantry and cavalry, so he must be a reckless fool. Hannibal made up his mind to fight Scipio, which is precisely what Scipio wanted. The next morning the armies marched out and deployed for battle. As the morning light grew stronger and the dust of marching men settled, Hannibal saw what he had not expected to see. All the Roman cavalry concentrated on the Roman left wing, and 4,000 Numidian cavalry massed on the Roman right. He had been fooled. His ingenious plan was worthless. It was too late to withdraw from the field. He would have to improvise. What were the options? He still had a superiority in infantry. Perhaps that would be enough. Yes, he would win with infantry if he could just hold off the Roman cavalry and Massinius' Numidians long enough. The Numidians began to skirmish, apparently without a result, whilst the Roman cavalry refused to move against their Carthaginian counterparts. The cavalry action seemed to be a draw. Good. Hannibal decided to send in the elephants. But Scipio had read Hannibal's mind. His 3 lines were each divided into separate blocks, with wide spaces between one block and the next, which were filled with the velites. Contrary to the popular conception, this was not a standard Roman deployment. The troops were ordered to blow trumpets, bang their shields, and make as much noise as possible, driving the elephants towards the velites. The velites fell back, funneling the elephants through the main lines to the rear of the Roman infantry. There they could be driven off or dispatched at leisure. It was a brilliant tactic, and had caught Hannibal completely by surprise. But worse was in store for Hannibal. Some elephants near the Carthaginian left flank blundered into Tychaeus' Numidians, disordering them. Massinius seized his chance and charged Tychaeus' horsemen, routing them and chasing them off the field. At the other end of the battlefield, elephants on the right flank ran in panic towards the Roman cavalry. These kept their heads, however, and drove them off the battlefield with a shower of javelins. Then, taking advantage of the confusion, they charged and scattered the Carthaginian cavalry. Hannibal's flanks were now exposed. For the moment, they were not threatened by Scipio's cavalry, for no one knew when they would return. If his veterans tried wrapping around the Roman infantry, they risked being cut to pieces by the Roman horse. Hannibal decided to cancel his outflanking maneuver. The Gauls and Carthaginian levies would beat the Romans frontally, whilst his veterans guarded against the Roman cavalry. But things were going badly in the centre. Hannibal's 3-line deployment looked like an imitation of the Roman triplex Achaeus. But that was window dressing, designed to convince Scipio that this was to be a standard frontal fight with one line replacing another. The Carthaginian levies had joined Hannibal only a few days earlier. They had been equipped and trained to fight like hoplites and had no idea of how to execute line relief, and Hannibal had had no time to teach them. The Gauls, who had fought under Hannibal in Italy, understood line relief and expected to fall back through the levies if necessary. Now it became necessary, but the levies would not let them through. Feeling they had been betrayed, the Gauls began to attack them furiously. The levies were assaulted by Romans and Gauls and fought for their lives. But in vain. Despite a tough resistance, the levy line eventually broke and streamed back towards the veterans. The veterans knew all about line relief, but they were not configured to let a line through their ranks, being originally intended to form a column and envelope the Romans. They had no choice but to prevent the levies from bursting through them and disrupting their formation. Some rallied on the flanks of the veterans, making their line longer. There was a lull in the fighting. Scipio ordered his triarii out to the flanks to match the frontage of the Carthaginians. The final clash took place. Everything now depended on timing. Hannibal's veterans were fresh, the Romans exhausted, and many of them wounded. They would not long survive a frontal fight against Carthage's best troops. Then fortune swung against Hannibal one last time. The Roman and Numidian cavalry returned. Hannibal had no reserves, no options, no plan. His veterans, who had fought in a dozen battles, knew exactly what would happen to them. Caught between cavalry and legionaries, most died where they stood. Those who tried to flee were largely cut down, the ground being excellent for pursuing horse. Hannibal escaped. He would live another 20 years, most of it in exile, but his career as a general was over. Carthage too would linger another 50 years, but would never again be able to challenge Rome.